mention the names of the 7 faculty members first of all, because they deserve an awful lot of credit for their dedicated commitment to this activity. They are Maureen Gauthier, Kerry Mastriano, Vicky Woodline, Jenny Copeland, Tricia Talbot, Jody Neves, and Chris. So they're today going to make a presentation to you, which they are also required to do. It's going to be videotaped. The videotape will be presented to the entire assessment literacy group, a number of folks from other school districts who we collaborated with to do this work. So without delaying any further, I'm going to give the team the floor. Take it away, Jody, by the way, is speaking for at least 2 individuals.
Don took care of our first slide, so we're moving on. What we did this year is we engaged in action research, and for those of you who haven't been familiar with the process of action research, it sounds a lot weightier and heavier than it actually is. Action research is not necessarily anything that's empirical research. It's basically you have a hypothesis, you see something going on in the classroom that perhaps you want to correct, address, intervene, or improve upon. You formulate a question. What sort of instructional strategies will I use in my classroom to see if this improves student achievement or intervenes properly, and collect data and go through from there. This is not something that needs to be a long period of time. You can do it for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and you get your evidence and you move on. Carrie's looking at me like, but we've been doing this all year. We've been doing this all year. So we went through a couple of iterations of what our question would be. There were some growth pains, and we tried a couple of things that didn't work, and then we stumbled through the messiness that can be action research. We found that the question that we wanted to focus upon was, how does using a criteria for success impact student achievement in writing? And criteria for success, for those of you, is anyone else defining that? I'm going to see a little bit. That's okay. Basically, if students know what is expected of them up front, how many times have students come into you and say, I've got a new English teacher this year, I've got a new social studies teacher this year, I don't know what's expected of me, I have to write a different way for him, or she wants it a different way. And this takes the guesswork out of that. This is what good work looks like. This is what good practice looks like. This is what the right answer looks like. And that's basically the criteria for success. So students know going into the assignment what a successful exemplar is. And so our question was, does that improve their achievement? And I think I just answered the slide. So there are many of these.
I don't know how to do that. I should know this. This is Carol Levin.
I was thinking, I think I did my slides. I did the first 4, Don, you can see that one. Just give me the nod to click.
So, to be a little more specific in what we determined as criteria for success, what we found is a common problem here at Mount Hope High School specifically is that we have Common Core language and rubric language and teacher language that doesn't exactly speak to the students. And then when we ask them what a proficient piece looks like or what did it mean to get developing on this task, they can't quite articulate that. Or they give our lingo back to us. They say, well, I had a good analysis. I analyzed. And then you say, well, what's analysis? And they have no idea. So what we found in kind of the development of our question was that there was a few criteria for the criteria for success that should be aligned to Common Core standards, because that's what we're using to focus and to create these tasks, but that it should be first and foremost in kid-friendly language. And that language is often what you as a teacher establish with your students along the way throughout your instruction within that unit. The second thing, so yeah, it should be aligned, A. B, it should be student-friendly. And the other thing is that it should be based on your population. And I think part of what got us into this little bit of a mess with having this teacher language and standard language was that we keep trying to address the whole population in the same way. And that we realized that instruction really should be very focused, and therefore assessment should be really focused. So how do we create assessments and targets and therefore criteria for success that is really targeted towards a given population that you have in the moment based on their needs at that time. So this is an example of a criteria for success. It's actually mine that I did with a narrative unit with my students. But just to kind of give you some examples, this comes from the rubric, the writing rubric, content and ideas. In kid language, a proficient narrative includes, here's an example, spins the events from the character's perspective. So throughout my instruction, we talked about what that meant, and I showed them benchmarks, and we talked, but to spin it, that's kid language, but they knew what I meant. My kids did. Carrie's kids might not know what that means, but this is from my students for this task at any given time.
So you can cater it to your individual assignments based on how you speak with your students. I use, for instance, a lot with Flash to explain you shouldn't bounce around the text. And so I would include that in my criteria for success. So you can cater it to your own.
And then
the one thing that we learned is that the kids have to create the criteria for success with you. It's not, we tried as the teachers in the classroom doing it first, but then we realized that we do need the students' input.
And then also just in going through, as English teachers, we could come up with probably 15 bullets that should fall under organization. But this was a task that I did in November with my kids, my CP population, and these were the things that I felt they needed to focus on at this time. Not everything, because they're not going to fix everything all at once. So I said, okay, if we can fix these things, at least this is a start, and we can build from there. Once they meet these targets, then we can move on to other targets. So even for word choice, gets far broader than using creative word choice to capture character's voice and does not repeat words, but frankly, I just didn't want my kids to repeat the same words over and over again. That's a start towards them thinking about word choice and how to use it appropriately. So that's just a sample. So what we saw as the process for going about doing this is first to review the writing task and the criteria for success for the students, and we actually found doing it with them and creating it with them is helpful. Second, to use exemplars so that, again, you're making sure that they understand what it means to spin a story from a different character's perspective. So using those exemplars to even explain the criteria for success targets. And then the third step is to tell them to write the essay.
So after that was all completed, we asked the students what they thought, and if they thought the criteria for success was helpful to them. And 55% said yes. Criteria for success is a clear understanding of what is expected of me while completing the task or assignment. So they were pretty strong on that. Then we also asked them if they felt their performance improved, and again, 55% said that it did. Some of the feedback we did receive when we asked them an open-ended question. CFS specifically maps out what is expected and how much it is expected, or how much is expected. You can also see where your work stands compared to the rubric. Here we have CFS helps us identify what you need to get done in order to become proficient and have an organized piece of work. Another student said, I like the criteria for success because it provided the incentives. So they, pretty much said, yes, it is helpful.
Okay, so I'm going to go over the teacher feedback, and there was only 6 of us that gave our feedback, only because there's 6 of us using this criteria for success at this moment in time. The questions that we chose to show you today were the ones that we felt best represented our data and answered the questions. The first one is it easy to establish criteria for success in our classroom? 83% of us agreed. There was one person that was neutral. And then the second question, does criteria for success give us a clear instructional focus? And we all felt 100% that it did. We felt that the students knew what they needed to know and then how to get to that proficient level. The next question was, does criteria for success help students understand what is expected of them? And again, 83% of us, 5 of us believed yes, And then there was one person that remained neutral on this question as well. And then the last two that we felt that we wanted to share with you was, I use criteria for success when I score students' work as part of my rubric. 16% strongly agreed with that, 67 agreed, and one person remained neutral again. And then we used the criteria for success. On one of the columns, there was some feedback, and that's where we as teachers were able to give them specific feedback for specific targets that they may have not been proficient on. And then the last one is I use criteria for success language to provide descriptive feedback on tasks and assignments. And again, 67% of us agree with that. Continuing on with the language so the students fully understand where they met, what targets they met, and what targets they still need to show proficiency on.
So just to reiterate, we already talked about this, students definitely, the vast majority of students said that they liked the process of criteria for success, that it helps them clarify exactly what was expected of them, especially when it was in a kid-friendly language. Our data was kind of all over the place. Again, there was only 6 of us, I think only 4 of us were able to actually utilize it in the classroom. It was a learning process, we were doing it as we went along. For instance, one of my classes was able to do, one of my classes didn't have time. So the data was a little bit of a hot mess, so we didn't see significant student improvement, especially since we're trying to get it done in a certain period of time so that we were ready for the next assessment literacy conference. But we, as teachers, all felt like it made us better teachers. We use these instructional strategies in our classrooms all the time, but this kind of forced us to step back, look at, okay, what are the standards being assessed here? What do we have to do to get those kids to achieve the standards? It really pulled us back a notch. And when we're teaching the same common task year in and year out, we kind of, it glosses over for us as well. So it makes us break down all the steps and ask them, okay, what do you guys think that a proficient introduction looks like? And it helps us to see what proficient work should look like. So we were all confident that with more practice and once we start using this on a regular basis, it's going to show significant improvement. Sorry. So for our next steps, we're planning on, this is just some examples of how you can use it in your classroom. I actually started to use this with my second class. I had them create the work itself, so I took their first drafts. I benchmarked their first drafts. I saw the things that they were not doing well, the standards that they weren't meeting, and I kind of made my own little cheat sheet for criteria for success. And then I had I set up the prompt, put it on the board, had the class come in, and then work and had them come up with a language. I said, okay, well, what do you think better word choice means? And I was saying cooler words, okay. Well, what does that mean? So we worked together piece by piece and put it in the kid-friendly language, and they loved it. I mean, they were all engaged. I haven't had a lesson that great in a really, really long time. They were all like, oh, I get it. And we gave them a peer editing, we gave them a survey afterwards to see if they enjoyed the process. And they thought they created a rubric and they should be like copyright credit for it, and they were all very excited about it. So it motivated them, they were engaged in it, they were included in the process, and they felt like, oh, I finally understand what it is that you want when you say analyze and quote. Now I get it, because they created it all. And then I also used the criteria for success that we created in the classroom and turned it into a checklist to provide them feedback. So I just copied and pasted the criteria for success, made it into a rubric, and either checked the box or said nearly meets, and I explained a little comment as to what they still had to do to get there. And they actually used it themselves as a peer editing tool. Yes? This is really going to be useful in common planning because you can use especially with all the alignments to the Common Core standards, you can use criteria for success, the process of it, to create templates to make sure that all of your Common Core standards align with the tasks that you're doing when you're creating tasks. You can work together to benchmark and have this criteria for success in front of you and say, okay, this is what a proficient text-based essay looks like. This is what the proficient task looks like. And work together in your groups. And really, once you create a criteria for success for text-based writing, narrative writing, persuasive writing, you have it there. You have that template there, and you can reuse it over and over and over again. And then you can tweak it as you go. Revising common assessments too, a lot of times we find that we get these papers back, or again, I'm using English as an example, but they're terrible and what's going on, what's wrong. Sometimes the prompt is awful, or the assignment isn't that good, or we need to tweak that ourselves. So you can utilize that in common planning groups as well. And then also for vertical alignment and trajectory of appropriate growth at each grade level. And then we're thinking way down the line for school-wide integration is to utilize criteria for success in the task validation process.